everyone. It's Sam McBride and Kristen Holstrom. We are back with another episode of Custody Queens Off the Clock. For those of you who don't know us yet, Kristen and I are California Certified Family Law Specialists by day and crime junkies by night. So thank you for joining us. If it's the first time that you're joining us on our channel, we appreciate it, and we love to hear all of your comments and posts about us. So we're going to jump back into another episode we're kind of calling the Reddit rabbit hole, where we go into the Idaho 4 case and talk through different theories and different possibilities out there. Before we get started, we just want to give a big reminder to everyone that this is absolutely for entertainment purposes. This is for our opinions only. We are not drawing conclusions. We are certainly not pointing the finger at anyone in particular. We're just kind of going through what's out there, looking at some of the evidence, trying to follow the trails, and really just have a good time going through this. So thanks again for joining us, and let us know what you like to hear most from us so we can kind of look into that for other shows.
Yes, and we encourage everyone to think objectively. Even if you've heard something 1,000 times when you're listening to this, open your mind up to a possibility, just being really objective. And I've kind of shared my story, how over the couple of years that I've kind of just transitioned. And at the end of the day, I still have so many questions about what actually happened in this case. And I don't know that we will, or I will ever get all the answers that I'm looking for, or that we will actually know what really happened that very quiet night on King Road. I'm actually being sarcastic there, if you don't know my sarcasm yet. But we want to encourage everyone to think outside the box. And we are going to continue down our Reddit rabbit hole that was from the last episode. So if you haven't watched that one, I encourage you to go there first. And all we're doing is kind of taking facts, and then we're looking at both sides of the argument, what strengthens, what weaknesses each of those arguments have, and whether or not it's a reasonable theory to even entertain as possibly true. All right, Sam, we have talked a lot about this in one of our previous shows regarding, is it possible that there was more than one suspect or perpetrator? And if so, what are those situations and possible people that we think could possibly fit that theory? So we're going to start here. Some threads suggest that more than one person entered the house or someone was aiding inside. There are different theories that are put out there in Reddit, and one of them includes proposals of others being involved. All right, Sam. So let's go through some of the strengths that it is possible that more than one person was involved, and how that theory can make sense or not make sense.
Well, in my mind, I think, unfortunately, with this case, we live in a world of anything is possible. I'm certainly aware of the conviction and the plea at this juncture, but I think what I'm struggling most with is just really figuring out the timeline and what happened. We don't have a clear story on that. At least in my mind, we don't. We certainly don't have Bryan Kohberger telling us exactly what happened, and there's a lot of inconsistencies being thrown out there. So I do think that there is, sort of a rational line of thought that someone else could be involved. One of the things that strikes me is just looking at some of the alleged timelines and how quickly it would have apparently had to have happened, all four unalivings. That, in my mind, is that would be a lot for one person to accomplish. And so I think for me, that raises a flag. Do I think it's impossible? No, I don't think it's impossible. I think that totally makes Bryan innocent? No, I actually don't think I've formulated an opinion at this juncture as to who did it or how it happened. But I do think that the idea that somebody acted alone and unalived for people that's a lot to digest. At least for me, it's a lot to digest.
And if you're following the proposed most popular timeline, it was all in less than 20 minutes, right? That, there's been a lot of red flags for me that have encouraged me to go do more research and analysis. But I have struggled with that one. I'm not saying with Sam, not saying it's completely impossible, but I think it would be difficult to pull out of the car, go to the house, go unalive 4 people, especially knowing that 2 of them were awake with so many defensive wounds, hide any evidence, possibly change clothes, and then get back to the car, all in a very, very, very limited amount of time.
And purportedly run into somebody that was then left alive.
Yes. It's
a lot to process.
It is a lot.
And to digest.
And one of the things with this house that really kind of grasps my attention is this is not your average condo house that's cookie cutter and that, you walk in and everybody has the same model. You have the one bedroom downstairs, three upstairs. Here's the kitchen. Everyone has the island. This is actually quite the opposite. I think some people refer to this as a tree house because one of the floors is kind of built into the landscape there. I do think it is possible to entertain for a couple reasons that more than one perpetrator or suspect was either A, part of this unalivings, and two, already in the house at the time the first unaliving took place.
Yeah, and I think that there's probably an uncountable amount of other alternatives where somebody could be involved in this, even if they weren't like on the scene. Could there have been somebody in a white Elantra driving the car away?
Was there a watch out guy? Was there a lookout? There are a lot of theories about that. Was there someone that was the getaway car? No, I'm with you there, Sam. And I think because the house is so unique that if you're following the theory that Maddie was the target, right? I don't necessarily think you would go straight to the top floor because that's where Maddie's room was and that's where her and Kaylee were both like in that bed allegedly that night. Like there's issues with whether or not we believe that's where that happened. I mean, this was three stories. So if you don't know the way the layout of the house is, how would you even more so be able to do that in less than 20 minutes? That's hard. That's hard to process.
It's very hard to process. And I think it's a great point to bring up the layout of the house because whenever you see a series of crimes like this committed and you look at a layout like that, and then on top of that, you compound the issue that it's not that big of a house. The square footage
No,
is
it's
pretty
not.
small.
If you look at the crime scene pictures, look how small the rooms are. Between the bed and the desk, there was very little walking room.
Right. So you would assume that somebody that was going in to a house like that would have a hard time quickly getting around and getting out without being stopped, in my mind.
Especially since it's also very likely that maybe nobody was sleeping at that time, right? I mean, there's still a lot of questions on did all of these unalivings happen as alleged, or did some happen outside of King Road and then they were moved? There's still so many questions, but I think that there are some pretty reasonable theories that can be followed. But if you have a target and you've never been in that house and you don't necessarily know where that target's room is, I think it would be a very risky assumption to say that you're going to not only be able to commit these unalivings, whether it was two that were planned or one that was planned, and then we have, unintentional bystanders, or if you were planning on hitting two different rooms, but you were still doing this all in a very short amount of time to be able to get out of the house, get off cameras, not be seen as much as possible, and drive away. You're not walking around drinking coffee trying to figure out what stuff is.
Right. And I also think that if you are looking at, like, so let's say that we have it right and that Bryan Kohberger acted alone and that the case is open and shut from that premise, then I have a hard time with there being then a sole or primary target and that everyone else is ancillary damage. It seems more personal than that when there's four people that don't make it out and someone that does.
Okay, but then you say personal, and I tend to agree with you. And that's where it starts to get muddy. And that's where I think that the prosecution's case starts to really, really have holes. Thompson has said many times they initially thought that there was an intended target and it was an isolated attack, but then nobody could really ever find a direct link that literally, without question, not making a single assumption or connecting a dot, there's been no evidence that said they were friends here, they were acquaintances, they worked here together, they went to this gym together, they grocery shopped together. None of that has ever really come to life. And I'm not going to buy, I followed a friend of a friend of a friend. I mean, we're talking about two massive universities in a very small area.
Right.
Right on the border. That is not unreasonable to be a friend of a friend or follow a friend of a friend. Like that,
No
I'm not
doubt.
buying.
It's like the 7 degrees of separation. Like a lot of times you have friends that overlap and that happens. It's just it doesn't is it possible? I think that's where my opinion is right now is yeah, it's possible. It's possible that we got it right. It's possible. But I think that there is so much reasonable doubt. There's so many questions, there's so many holes. We don't have information to support exactly how the perpetrator or perpetrators got into the house. We don't have evidence as to whether they were there previously or there was a break-in. Like, we don't know that. We have some stuff that may suggest some theories, but, like, we can't narrow that down, and I think that's a huge issue to not be able to narrow that down because whatever theory you are going with following that, it has to be intrinsically flawed because it starts from a premise that you can't prove.
No, I agree. And then you have, I think Dylan's testimony was, or investigation, whatever you want to call it, was that she saw a man go out through the sliding door, of the kitchen. Okay. There was no forced entry on any door of the house. It wasn't uncommon for that sliding glass door to be unlocked. I think the overall opinion is that the sliding door was probably unlocked that night. There has also been rumors that the front door was open when the police got there, and it is possible that the front door was locked or it was unlocked. Oh, but by the way, half of this area knows our code because it was a party house and more than the roommates knew what the code is to get in the house. So I have a hard time nailing down that it had to be someone outside of the immediate University of Idaho, like on campus or housing within the campus.
There's just a lot more information out there that we don't know. I think that there are probably a lot of other witnesses, maybe not specifically inside the house or anything like that, but I think that there's a lot of outside witnesses that we don't know about yet that maybe saw things previous nights, heard things days after the
You're not
fact.
talking about fight night, are you?
I'm not talking about it, Kristen.
Why more people are talking about it? That's what's crazy to me.
I'm not talking about it, but I mean, in any event, we haven't been able to fill in those gaps. Those gaps exist, and so I think that even if you are on the fence of I'm watching you guys and you're wrong, we have a conviction, we have a plea, the story is open and shut. We might have the right conviction. We might have a plea from the right person. He acted alone, but I don't think we have the facts straight. And I think that there's a whole lot of other facts out there before and after this, a whole lot of other witnesses, and everyone really, in essence, showing some sort of inconsistency with the next that leaves you with the feeling that we don't quite have it figured out. And it's a feeling, part of it, right? It's just a feeling, and it's just my opinion, but it just doesn't seem like it matches up.
No, I agree with you. I think it's being so particular with Hippler of what is being released. And even if it is released, I see these comments, everything's come out, you're getting everything. And it's like, no. And how do we know if we're getting everything if we don't even know what everything is? And B, a good portion of what we're getting is either redacted or modified or condensed. And you're going to get a piece of Hunter Johnson's interview. You're going to get a piece of DM's interview, but you are not privy to the whole thing. You're going to get a copy of this document, but we're redacting 80% of it. That's what I have the problem with. And I'm all about transparency. Usually in our court process of what we do a lot of pretty complicated custody and divorce trials. And it is all about transparency. Everything is, if I have something, I have to show it to you. You have the ability to go do your own research on it and prove its authenticity and bring your witnesses to defend that or support it, whatever your position is. But I feel like this is, we're only going to give you what we want to give you that only makes this case look a certain way in a certain way.
And on the other side of the fence, maybe none of it would change any of it, right?
And that's
But
the
like
thing.
when I
That's the
look at a
thing.
redacted interview, I struggle with that. And there might be a very good reason for that. I don't know the good reason for it. I'd love to be told the good reason for it, but I don't see a good reason for it. And I think that you have to know that if you are partially disseminating something to the public and you are leaving out crucial parts in the interview when it's only a 16-minute interview, for example, that there are going to be more questions and answers from that.
You know what it reminds me of when I watch that is when we get text messages in a really high conflict case and oftentimes involving domestic violence and abuse. And the other side gives you like 5 text messages, 4 of which are very incriminating to your client and not helpful. And then you talk to your client and you're like, okay, well, what happened before this? What was the context of these text messages? And then you find out that there's a lot more text that may make the other person look equally at fault, or it may look them in even a worse light, right? So it's like, you don't just piecemeal evidence. And that's my biggest thing with this case is like, if you got nothing to hide and there's no issue with transparency and the result is likely going to maintain the same result, then show us.
Right. And the thing is, I think that that is the best point that you could possibly make. And if you take anything out of the show, it's that. And we're taking a step away from the chain of custody, but we're looking at really the rule of completeness. And we're looking at, do we have the entire context for the information? So what Kristen's talking about when you're looking at a text message, an example would be, someone shows a text message that says, no, you're not going to see, baby John anymore, right? And if you just submitted that to the court, then obviously that person is put in a negative light, right? But maybe you didn't see the whole conversation before that where he's saying, I'm at the soccer field and I want to show up and I want to meet him today, specifically today. And that's what's being responded to. It's like, no, it's my time. You're not going to see him anymore today, right? And so it can be taken so far out of context. And I think that's kind of the intrinsic, I guess, for lack of a better word, paranoia that I have with this stuff is that if you don't have all of it, then you might be missing nothing and you might be missing something.
And I always feel if you're not transparent with that stuff, you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? You're always
And a
on
lot
in
of these
limbo.
things, there's reasonable answers and there's reasonable conclusions, but what are they?
It's like the position that you've heard it from probably even before Dateline came out, that not only was it Bryan, not only had he visited the King Row residence multiple times over multiple months, they automatically concluded that because it hit a tower, it was him in one of those 22,000 white Elantras in the vicinity that the ping would tech and work with his phone. And then they said that he even drove back the next morning to admire his work, right? And for a whole year, I'm sitting here going, where are the pictures, right? Give me some picture that can make me believe that, even if it's not the right white Alondra, they shoved that in front of people before. So it's like, show us something that would equate to that. And then I find out that what they had on his bank statement is that he had gone to a ATM in Moscow, that morning of the crime. So the 13th, right? Well, knowing that Moscow and Pullman are only less than 10 miles apart, how close was this ATM? Was it in the neighborhood and he went to an ATM in the neighborhood? Or was it 4 or 5 miles away, which was really only a couple miles from his house? Do you see what, I'm like, give me something that would
All
allow me to
this
follow your train
screams
of thought.
to me is, despite the fact that I am really pro giving all of the families of these victims peace, and Kristen and I in no way, shape, or form want to put anyone in bad places. We want everyone to be able to move on with their lives. I just continue to be in a position where I wish I could see a trial.
Same. I actually was really upset, quite upset when I found out this case was settling. And I'll put this on the record. I see pros and cons for both sides to do this. I see pros for the defense to take the plea deal, which a lot of people don't agree with. The justice system is not perfect. It is littered with flaws, and there can be bias or there can be assumptions. It can be concerns with a jury being biased, especially with having such a high media coverage. I can also see pros for the prosecution to want it. This has been going on for 2.5 years. They want to get these victims' families closure. I think it was a mixed bag from the victims' families of what their positions were, but I can see why they would want this over. I mean, I couldn't imagine having to hear people talk about my child as a victim 3 years following a very unfortunate unaliving. But I see both positions in all of this. If there was ever a case, and I say this all the time, if there was ever a case that should have gone to trial, it was this one.
Yeah, no doubt.
So we kind of went off track, but let's sum up the potential for the multiple accomplice Reddit rabbit hole based on the structure of the house, the layout, whether it was possible there could be more than one perpetrator, and is it possible that it was someone that was known to the victims?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the answer is all of this is still possible. Unfortunately, I think it is all still possible. I think when you go back and you look at, there's tons of not only bloggers out there, but there's tons of videos that are released, even just going back to noise complaints. You see a noise complaint, you see people communicating with the police. I think it was Kaylee and Hunter behind communicating with the police. And they're going
The one with
through,
the
I
zip
think.
ties on the arms, that was a little creepy initially the first time I saw that.
Yeah, and I think there was another one I saw where it looked like the police were closer to the second floor, as opposed to the first floor. So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
leads me to believe that maybe it was normal to use both entries and exit ways.
Yeah, I agree.
And especially the type of house, the type of community, college town, sorority, people coming in and out, so many different people apparently going in and out of that house, people being very familiar with that house while not apparently being familiar with all of the people that lived in the house, like
Well, and
all of
remember,
those.
Sam, that one, it was another noise complaint, and I don't even think any of the roommates were actually at home, and there was people in their house drinking. Cops were there and they actually ended up calling Maddie on the phone, and it was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'll tell everyone to leave." But that was a very clear illustration that this was not a quiet home where everybody used a lock day in and day out and nobody came over. It was actually the exact opposite for me.
And so the conclusion for me, I think right now is like I cannot and will not, and Kristen is not either pointing a particular finger at a particular person. But I am saying that there is a lot of opportunity there. There is a lot of people going in and out. There is a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of holes in this case. And I think we're going to continue to see more and more as the days and weeks go on.
I think one of the reasons we bring it up is like a case like this can really happen. It can happen to a lot of different people. And again, I don't always get it right. Sam doesn't always get it right. We often get it wrong, but we're definitely going to talk through and work through it. There was also a lot of different shoe prints in the snow in the crime scene photos. And there was more that was, I think, just released last week that were even different footprints. And you read the comments like, oh, these were Vans. It's like, okay, Vans is literally probably one of the most popular college shoes for not even just men, but for women as well. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of evidence that a lot of assumptions were just made on
Hmm.
rather than truly actually getting to the truth.
No doubt.
All right. Well, I'm just going to ask you. So, we actually printed a lot of the comments and questions that were given to us over the last couple weeks. We had tons and tons, which is really exciting. Please keep them coming. And remember, if you have a source and you want to point something else out, please give us the source, give us the link, tell us where you got it. We want to educate ourselves as well through this process, and we don't know everything. So, all right, Sam, one of the questions right here, it is from Andrea Gray 202, and it says, "Love your channel and love hearing sensible voices that have the courage to take on questions of this case. I would love to see you address what legal options he actually does have going forward. I understand that the time frame for an appeal came and went. However, can't another legal team take on his case, reinvestigate, and based off of what they did, submit for a new trial?"
I don't know. I straight up don't know the answer to that. I would assume that there's something that can be done because often there is something that can be done. A lot of times when you see a plea deal, you think that's the end of the road. They can't do this or they can't do that, but that's really not always the case. There's typically quite a few different paths. I don't know if anyone's ever seen or heard about the Innocent Project, but really that's kind of something that I've followed here and there and noticed in doing so that there is typically more than people realize that can be done to potentially get another court date, another swing at it, or things to be sort of ending in a different way than they currently are. But I don't know the answer to that. So Kristen and I were certified family law California specialists, and that's for family law only. So we're not specialists in this area. But I think it's a great question. And I think it's something to really continue to explore because it's not, in my experience, the total end of the road. It may be, I haven't had an opportunity to practice in that state, and I'm not antiquated with those laws. So it may be just it's a totally shut road, but I don't know that I have known of a case where it was a shut road.
So I'm with you on Sam, and I always say an attorney that does everything is generally not very good at anything. But we actually have a certified appellate specialist that actually works for us. And I was thinking about seeing if we could get him on to at least explore what possible different routes may look in general. Obviously, we're not licensed in Idaho. We are here in California, but a lot of the processes are similar. I know when people say, "Oh, he waived his right to every appeal," there are generally always other avenues that someone can take to try to prove something. And there are a lot of projects out there, like Innocence Project, that is generally one of the biggest ones that I am familiar with. But there are a lot of attorneys and bigger firms that take on cases where they believe somebody who was actually convicted is likely innocent, and they will do a very extensive discovery. They will hire their own private detectives. They will get copies of the records. And yeah, in essence, they're trying to prove enough to show the court, hey, this needs to go back down and this needs to be relooked at, reheard, re-ruled on. But there's a problem here. And I'm saying this in very simple, kind of dumbed down language. Obviously, the appellate process can be quite over most of our heads. And so I will see if I can get Ron to join us for an episode to talk to us about the appellate process. But I agree. I do not think this is the end of the road. Unfortunately, not by a long shot. And if you are looking for another kind of true crime documentary that I found to be absolutely fascinating, there is and I want to say it's like a 5-part series on Amazon Prime. It was called Outcry. And it actually is about a very young adult. I think he was actually still in high school, that he was convicted of SA of, I think, a 4-year-old. And he went through the trial. He was actually found guilty on a couple different counts. He was convicted. He was starting to serve his prison sentence. And the whole documentary goes over about 4 or 5 years. He professed his innocence from the very first meeting. The arrest continued, and he actually got an appellate attorney. And at the time, it was his defense attorney that went and met with this appellate attorney that said, hey, I think my client's really innocent. This is what I have. I really want you and your team to take another look at it. And it was defeat after defeat after defeat. And then what do you know? You get it in front of the right person. And not only was conviction overturned, it ended up being dismissed and thereby exonerated like it never happened. But this was over like a 6-year period. Anyway, wonderful documentary. I went through every single emotion from angry to what the F, like, I don't like him, to really understanding the whole process. And I think there's a lot of similarities with this case. So I encourage you guys to all go watch it. It's a really a phenomenal series, but very similar approach and possibly future plan.
Yeah, and we're going to keep going through more email questions in future shows. So please continue to leave your questions or theories in our comments, and we will continue to go through them when we can.
Wait, Sam, I got one more question before we end this. What is your opinion on a prosecutor that has been in office for 33 years but has actually only had one trial? It's Bill
I
Cosby.
similarly don't have an opinion. What's your opinion, Kristen?
My opinion is that a lot of those were probably plea deals. I would like to know the percentage of how many actual trials took place compared. So of those, I mean, again, it can be normal for a prosecutor to have 10 cases, or they might have 1 case a year. I don't know. It's a very big difference. But again, it's a small town. That is the first step of the process that would make my antennas go up. And 2, I would like to know what the percentage of those cases are that actually went to trial or that resulted in a win on Thompson's side simply because it was a plea deal and a plea acceptance.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that, obviously, I think that most people would assume that if you're a prosecutor, that means that you're a litigator. And I think I want to also believe that. So I don't know what opinion that gives me of that, because the concern for me is if somebody is prosecuting a case that doesn't have the capacity to do so, but as an attorney, typically you're not doing something that you don't have the capacity to do. So all of us kind of start somewhere. Kristen and I are litigators. So I think I would want my prosecutor to be a litigator, but I don't know how many cases, like Kristen said, are in the town, how many really settle, why they settle, or any of those facts. So I don't know, because we didn't go through the trial, that would make much of a difference in my analysis. It sounds like a lot of plea deals were happening, and a lot of plea deals happen all the time. But yeah, I mean,
Most cases actually result in some sort of plea deal. Most.
I'd
I
like
would
to
love to
think
hear
that
everything.
a prosecutor was prosecuting, or litigating, but I don't know enough about that to really know how that would affect
And I
plea.
also think that a lot of people don't realize that the head DA or the deputy district attorney is usually what they're called. They have a bunch of assistant DAs that work underneath them. But a lot of times, the one name will be on the pleadings, or the one name will be listed as the lead prosecutor. So, for instance, if we have 20 attorneys that work with us at Custody Queens, oftentimes one of our names will be listed at the top for many, many reasons, but it generally doesn't mean I am the one that personally handled the trial. And so there's just a lot of logistics that go into it. But I actually am going to do some research to see if I can find any information about how many of those, even in a given year, how many cases actually resulted in a conviction following a trial, or what percentage were plea agreements. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. That was a good one. If you really enjoyed this content, or you didn't like it, but you like listening to us, that's okay too. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It helps us get into front of more new faces. We love the comments. Please ask us anything, really. We try to get involved in the comments as much as possible. We're hoping to start going live here very soon, now that we have enough of an audience base that I think would like for us to do that.
Until next time.